these guys, they still have to fight. And they get some intelligence. They think there's a counterattack coming. And by the way, this intense fighting is a matter of days. So everything that we're talking about is happening in a couple days. And now they think that there is a counterattack coming. So they dig in, they get in position, they set their machine guns up from where they think the counterattack from the Argentinians is going to come from. And then they start getting mortared again. Hit with artillery. Here we go. Back to the book. We all hit the ground again as the shell landed. No sooner had I started to pick myself up when a high-pitched scream rushed into my ears, a deadly sound. I can still hear it today. I looked down to where the shell had hit in the same area as before. The ground was smoldering, smoke lifting and evaporating. 5 meters away from the hole lay 2 bodies. The sight of one of them will stay with me until I die. His Paris smock was riddled with smoke escaping from every corner, the arms, bottom, and collar. The lad turned onto his back, screaming, "Oh God, help me, please." I ran down the hill in fright and concern. I dropped to my knees by the screaming soldier. His eyes met mine. Did he register me? I only saw Denzel. Denzel, the character we all loved. I wrenched my eyes to his legs. One was hanging off, ripped to shreds, the bone clearly visible. His screaming churned my stomach. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. He tried to look down at his leg. "Don't fucking look this way," I barked. "Lay back down, hear me?" He dropped to his back, holding his thigh. Jonah Jones, a 9 Squadron lad, came to my side. "Vince, I'll deal with him. You see to him," he said, pointing to Craig Jones. Craig lay very close to Denzel. Clive rushed to help me. Craig hadn't any visible wounds. He lay quietly as Clive tried to talk to him. I tried to pull his smock open and pull his trousers down to check for a wound. Denzel screamed and moaned behind me, "Help me, help me." Jonah was busy seeing to his leg. I pulled out my knife and started to cut through Craig's denims and quilted Arctic clothing. My frantic cutting was too slow, and I knew it. The doctor skidded in beside me, pulled out his scissors, and started to cut through Craig's leggings. I pulled the ripped material to one side. We had reached the skin. His legs had massive lacerations in all directions, spilling muscle and bone, but there wasn't hardly any blood. The doctor shouted at me to tie his muscles together. I pulled out my field dressings and tied the lacerations together. The doctor was joined by a medic who went to Denzel. I was half conscious of cries of "Medic, medic, stretcher bearer" all down the hill. Craig was lying still. I slid up beside him and looked into his face. It was pale with no color at all. His eyes stared into my face. "You'll be okay, Craig. Just hang on, mate. Hang on." Clive held his head, stroking his forehead, repeating my words. "Craig, can you hear me?" I shouted. The doctor pulled and tugged frantically at Craig's clothing, trying to reach more obvious wounds. "Craig, you'll be okay. Hang on." He looked at me, and a slight smile came across his face. His eyes laughed at me, bright and wild. His grin spread, then all expression faded. He faded away. Craig, don't. Keep in there." His eyes closed. He died then and there. He was a young soldier, 20 years of age. The records will say Private Craig Jones. The doctor motioned to Bear to get him on and away. Denzel was also lifted and carried away. I fell onto my bottom. Jonah and Clive patted me on the shoulder. I tried to get up but fell to my knees again. I hadn't realized until then that I was crying without knowing it. I cried with all the pain and sadness. It didn't seem fair. Johnny came to my side and picked me up. He picked up my weapon and started to guide me to our bunker again. I glanced at Steve and Sass. Sass was crying as well, and Steve had his head buried in his hands. I stumbled to our bunker, weeping. When I sat down, Steve Wake put his arm around me and whispered, "You done a brave thing, Vince. I couldn't have gone down there after those shells landed in the same spot. You done all right, mate." His gesture didn't register. I cried with exhaustion, hatred, and pity. Craig and Denzel remain with me today. Craig, who died, and Denzel, who lost a leg and so nearly his life. When people write or tell of experiences of this kind, I know now that they can never really tell the facts for anyone to totally understand. For often, the reader is wrapped in his own make-believe game of war. For me personally, this 5-minute experience changed my whole life and attitude towards war. Wars will always be fought, and I would go again for my beliefs, but I hope never again to see a face fade from me. It took nearly a year after this war for Craig's face to go before I slept. Nearly a year to wipe out Denzel's smock on fire and his scream. Until I die, it will remain a part of me.